Recording going. All right. Hello, everyone. Hope you had a good weekend. We are at the final stretch run for the semester. We're pretty much just about done. So let me give you a little overview of the plan for the last couple days of class. And then, yeah, we're really just going to chat the last couple days. I'm not, it's sort of a unit, but it's so shortened by how far behind everything got that it's not really any much of a unit. So we're just we'll chat about some stuff, have some hopefully fun, interesting discussions, play with some sort of crazy ideas, and yeah, try to get a little bit clearer on stuff. So what we're planning on doing today, we're going to talk about this Margalis and Sagan article a little bit. I'm not going to stick to the article very much. The article, I appreciate the article's poetic fervor, but it's a little bit not my. I prefer my philosophy a smidge more rigorous. So we'll use it as a starting point at least, because there's at least some very interesting ideas contained within it, and it's going to be a good opportunity to start thinking through the question of what it is we actually mean when we talk about intelligent behavior. So what we're going to do today, we'll talk about this article a little bit, use this as sort of the springboard to actually figure out what we mean by intelligent behavior in the first place. Then tomorrow on Thursday, I'm gonna make you some very poor PDFs on my home printer. So God only knows if it'll be readable, but hopefully it'll be readable anyway. A little bit of Aristotle and a little bit of actually Bedau again, talking about this question of the relationship between living things and sort of intelligence. Is basically the topic that you all seem to be most interested in, and it's perfectly understandable, was this sort of question: how does the question of life that we're asking relate to the question about things like consciousness or personhood or choice or intelligence? What's the relationship between life and these various things? So that's what we're going to sort of play with for the next couple days. We'll do another, so we'll have another daily assignment will be due on Thursday. That'll be the last daily assignment that's due. It'll be also the last new reading I assign. On next Tuesday, we'll do sort of course overview kind of stuff, continue to play with some things, and I'll probably give you Thursday off because you all have enough on your plates above and beyond this class. I hope I haven't increased your workload much more beyond what it normally would have been, but I know for a lot of your other classes, you are having to do more work than you originally were. So I'll figure, we'll take a day off at the end. It's fine. It's a rough semester in a lot of respects. We'll reward ourselves. You've all done great work, sort of preserving with it up to this point. So that's my plan for the remainder of the semester. Anyone have any questions or comments or thoughts about anything before we get started with stuff? All right. Then just a reminder, the paper, so it's not really a final paper exactly, but the paper at the very least is due the Sunday before finals week starts, so the 3rd of May. So a couple people have already sent me in drafts. I'll try to get those looked at as soon as I possibly can. Yeah, otherwise I'm happy to accept drafts whenever, though I'm incredibly still behind on various grading things, so I can't promise you that I'll actually be able to give you great comments. The earlier you get it to me, probably the better the comments I will be able to give on that paper will be. So any other questions? All right, then let's start playing with stuff. And I want to make clear, right? I mean, there's not going to be a paper about any of the stuff we're talking about. We're just playing with stuff. We're playing with some ideas here. So let's try to play. All right, so what do you all mean? So there's a question that's multiple of you have asked me. Here's our question. Can data from Star Trek, and it's just an example, we could pick anything, any intelligent thing you want. How can something like data not be alive if it's not an if he displays characteristics of intelligence? Okay. So this is so I'm going to turn that question around on you. Okay, you all tell me, what does it mean for something to be intelligent? Respond to your question with a question. So you all tell me, what does it mean to be intelligent? What's intelligent behavior? How would you recognize it? When you act intelligently, what are you doing? When you act unintelligently, what are you doing? What do any of you mean by this talk of intelligence? See, it's my trick. I'm going to make you all answer the questions. All right, so we're getting some proposals here. So the first proposal we've got, and I'll write these down because they're good proposals. First, sorry, I'm having technical things going wrong. Fix the technical things. What is going on? There we go. Zoom was having a moment. All right, so proposal number 1. Intelligence means meaningfully engaging with stimuli in an environment. All right, good proposal. So what did you mean when you said meaningfully? Because that's sort of begging the question, because it just sort of sounds like what you mean by meaningfully engaging with stimuli as opposed to not meaningfully. Do you just mean, I don't know, intelligently engaging with stimuli in an environment? Because all kinds of things engage in stimuli with their environment, right? I mean, that's Margellis's and Stagen's basic point, is that if you look at bacteria, they are engaging with stimuli in their environment, right? So, okay, if you want to say they have to be doing it meaningfully, okay, well, what does that mean? Right? Are we begging the question here? Let's get a few more proposals. We've got number 2, to be able to act against self-preservation. I like this one. This is good. So can I paraphrase this? Perhaps the ability to do something dumb? Because that's what's weird about this definition. I do like it, actually. I quite like this account of intelligence. Being able to act against self-preservation. So I assume this means acting instinctually, you'll always in some sense act on the basis of self-preservation. So if you find actions against self-preservation, you know you have an intelligent action. This is sort of a weird account, but again, I like it. I think this one's fun. This is sort of a weird account. You can only know that something's intelligent if it's acting stupidly. On this definition, perhaps. But it's an intriguing proposal, at least. It doesn't help us figure out what intelligent actions are intelligent or not, however. See, we got being able to process large amounts of varying information. This is another good one. Though again, I wonder if this one is question begging in a certain sense. So being able to process large amounts of varying information. Process in what sense? This is the question that I'm left with. Because there's all kinds of things that it seems like process large amounts of varying information. I mean, depending on how you define it, the sun is a deeply complex information system, right? You can do sort of information quantum mechanics and sort of measure all of the information microstates going on within the sun, and it's an enormous number of information microstates. Does that count as processing? And indeed, even just, again, these sort of single cellular organisms that somehow move in the direction of the sugar glucose and away from the not sugar glucose water, is that processing information, and if so, in what sense? Someone's adding this idea of intentionality, intentionally engaging with things. So purposeful behavior of some sort. All right. But again, this seems to be pretty broad. If Mayer's notion of teleonomic is correct, right, all of these teleonomic behaviors are, in a sense, purposeful. Right. So maybe this adds maybe a little bit even more than just purposeful behavior. Maybe by intentionality, we mean sort of self-purposeful behavior. I know what my own purpose is. So something like choosing them deliberately, kind of self-awareness. And indeed, this would be a good definition also just of consciousness as well. And intentionality and consciousness are indeed notions that very frequently go together, right? Consciousness and intentionality. Let's see. Yep. So that's going down. That adds a few others. Good. Good. Yep. Consciousness. A lot of people are now, as I'm going through the chat, a lot of people are starting to throw in consciousness. All right. Yep. Good. 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 Yep. So good. So going through the chat, everyone has in this definition of consciousness. Well, okay. Let me now then again ask you a question for a question. What does consciousness mean? Because again, I can ask that same, and I don't even mean like, is consciousness reducible to brain states, or is it a separable substance? Not like what kind of thing is consciousness. I just mean, what phenomenon are you all pointing to, or when you point toward the phenomenon of consciousness? Is it the same thing as perception? Is perception and consciousness, are those synonyms? Is everything that perceives consciousness? Is it maybe, as someone's suggesting in chat, maybe a kind of self-perception? Or self-awareness? All right, but what does that actually mean though, right? Like, what does it mean to actually be aware of yourself? Descartes' whole thing was this, I think, therefore I am, right? That was how Descartes tried to answer this question. So, okay, when Descartes says, I think, therefore I am, what does that actually mean? Because that's another one that's super vague and super unclear. It seems like what Descartes means by this is something like, I have an awareness of the various cognitive capacities, so it's not just that the cognitive capacities themselves are taking place, it's that I'm sort of aware of it. So for Descartes, it's actually like not some, he doesn't actually use the word consciousness ever. The word consciousness is invented later. But what Descartes seems to be pointing toward is that, like, when I doubt, I'm aware that I'm doubting. When I perceive something, I'm aware that I'm perceiving it. Descartes says the same thing. He characterizes this as perceiving that I perceive. That's how he sort of characterizes a sort of similar idea as the one that Descartes points to. It's the closest thing that exists to Descartes' notion of consciousness in ancient philosophy. All right, so let me go through. We got some more chat stuff coming in. Oh, good. Someone's bringing up the phenomenon of blind sight, though. Oh, excellent. Let's do that. Yeah, let me add this as a challenge. Right? So, for example, there's one of the sort of archetypical phenomena cases of blind sight is if you are temporarily blinded, so there's not a problem with your actual visual cortex, so your visual system is working fine, but for whatever reason you're sort of suffering from some kind of psychological blindness, inability to see. I can throw you a ball and you'll still catch it as an automatic reflex. And so let's play with this idea for a second. So this will be a useful idea. And it's one that again connects back to the Margulis and Sagan piece a little bit too. So okay, so we don't even have to go to blind sight. We can actually do this with way more basic stuff. Any of you musicians? Are any musicians here? Okay, so at least one person raised a hand anyway. So we got a couple of musicians. All right. My guess is when you were learning to play your instrument, you spent an enormous amount of time being consciously aware of the placement of your fingers and the way that, if it was maybe a wind instrument, the way that you were breathing. Is that accurate? And again, for people who aren't musicians, if any of you are athletes, right? My guess is, again, you had a very similar experience as an athlete, right? If you're learning to throw a ball, at first you had to spend an enormous amount of time figuring out how you were sort of like holding your feet, how you were winding up, how you were holding the ball in your hands, where to release it. What happens when you actually get good at doing any of those things? You stop thinking about anything. You stop being conscious of what it is that you're doing. Weirdly, that's a mark of mastery. To master something is to no longer need to be conscious of it. So does that mean playing the piano is unintelligent behavior? Indeed, it actually seems like the opposite, right? The mastery, being able to play the piano, that's the more intelligent behavior. Right? The person who's sort of fumbling, I have very little musical talent. The best I can do, I tried to learn how to teach myself to play the recorder a little bit, because it was like the easiest instrument, just because I wanted to practice with it. I wasn't particularly good at it, but as I got better and I was thinking about it less, I was playing better. My behavior, my play seems to be more intelligent, more sophisticated, more advanced. Someone's making a comment, and I think this is a good one. This seems to be related to sort of the Taoist idea of sort of like effort without effort, acting without acting. I think indeed that's correct. When you've mastered something, it's precisely when you're not thinking about it. I heard from a golfer once. It was sort of this horrifying story that someone once, he was a famous golfer. He had won a lot of tournaments, and someone asked him, "Hey, wow, this is really great. Can you teach a class how to golf?" And the guy was like, "Sure, I'll do that, whatever." And so he said he went into the class, sort of stood in front of it, and the students were like, "Okay, teach us how to golf." And he was like, "Okay, well, let me think. How do I golf?" And he was like, "Wait, how do I golf? Oh God, how do I swing a golf club? Oh God!" And he actually like couldn't golf anymore. When he had actually started thinking about how to do it, like, do my hands go here? Like, do I bend my back? No, straighten. He like lost it. He actually lost it by becoming conscious of it, by becoming aware of it. All of a sudden, he lost the sort of capacity. It's this way with me with teaching. I really don't know how I teach. I couldn't really give you an account of it. Students seem to say that it works pretty well, so I'm going with it. But I'm sort of like always terrified that like one day I'll be like, what is it that I'm actually doing, and just like not know anymore. Right? Because I don't especially know. Here's another one: language. None of you think about how to. You might occasionally craft a sentence in your head, but that's pretty rare. Mostly, you actually don't think. You're not aware of how you're forming sentences. And this talk of speech is particularly important, right? Because that's one of the sort of the archetypical things that are supposed to distinguish intelligent life. Intelligent life is speaking life. When Aristotle actually defines life, human beings as rational animals, right? Though literally the Greek there is logos zoe, animal that talks, is the most literal translation of that, talking animal. Yeah, and you don't actually think about that. You're actually mostly not self-aware, right? I mean, it's actually, when are you sort of I mean, we use this word like self-conscious. Usually that's actually a bad thing when you're feeling self-conscious, right? When you're sort of in some sort of like expert state, that's when you're least self-conscious, least self-aware. And yeah, and so how is this idea of self-consciousness, how can you reconcile this with the fact that so much of the behaviors that we identify ourselves as possessing as a result of intelligence, how so many of those activities don't particularly seem to be things that we're aware of? Now, what are we aware of? And this is getting to some of the questions I'm getting at in the chat too. So, okay, what are we actually aware of when we're doing these higher level activities? What we're actually thinking is not how do I play the piano. We're thinking about what we're doing with that skill or that capacity. And we need to do this because we can potentially do multiple things with it. That's why I really like the person who is suggesting acting against self-preservation as an example. Like, we can do multiple things with these intelligent capacities. This is connected to this idea of choice. We choose what to do with the capacity because the capacity can be used for many things. If I know how to play the piano, I could play an A note or I could play a B note, and you can tell I don't know how to play the piano because what I just said was probably idiotic. But there are a variety of things that I can do with that capacity to play the piano. If I know how to throw a baseball, then I could throw a fastball, or I could throw a curveball. I know how to do both of them. I could do either. What I'm aware of, if I'm an expert baseball player, is this sort of discernment. Okay, well, what's the best pitch to throw in this circumstance, right? It's sort of applying the skill. How does the skill get applied? Have any of you ever, this can go weirdly go in the other direction too. You can also choose to purposely become aware of some things that you do automatically. For example, if any of you have ever tried to meditate, one of the things that you're sort of called to pay attention to in meditation is your own breathing. And breathing is something you're so good at, you don't need to think about. It's something you're normally not aware of. Yet you can actually choose to become aware of it. And indeed, what many people report when this happens, many people actually report when they're first getting started with meditating that they get freaked out because all of a sudden it seems like they've stopped breathing automatically. They're like, something has gone weird with breathing because they've started paying so much attention to it. And they're like, wait, am I breathing right now? Oh my God, I'm not breathing right now. How do I start breathing? How do I start breathing? Like, right? Like, whereas before it's this normal thing that you're not aware of, and becoming aware of it and making it this sort of object of conscious awareness, it actually isn't automatic anymore and now becomes something that you can do or not do, and how creepy that is with your own breath. Your breath is something that you can or cannot control. All right. Intentionality seems to imply something like choice. So again, we don't necessarily have to mean free will or anything like that. I mean something way more basic than choice by this. What I mean by choice is discernment amongst alternatives. And this was already part and parcel of what many of you are already sort of hinting toward in some of the comments you all were sending in too, right? That you sort of discern amongst alternatives. So the discernment is vaguely the consciousness part. Right? The awareness part. Right? And then as a result of you discerning your situation, you discerning your environment, you perhaps perceiving your environment, you decide amongst various sorts of alternatives. You sort of, by becoming aware, you sort of enter a decision state, and then you sort of navigate that decision state. Yeah, and indeed, our human capacity to do this is indeed pretty vast, as someone's sort of suggesting in the chat right now. That, yeah, we actually have the ability to sort of consciously shape unconscious processes of ours, right? Automatic processes of ours. This has been pretty well documented. I mean, there's some very weird stuff with meditators. Meditators come to have really weird MRI scans. Their brains don't look normal. There's other weird sort of things that have been discovered with the bit like cognitive behavioral therapy, where sort of like gaining sort of a conscious, we can sort of like consciously shape the way that various sort of autonomic processes take place. For example, the way sort of adrenaline gets produced in the body, that can be not exactly consciously controlled, but it can be consciously shaped at the very least. Right? and in ways that can indeed be quite permanent. I think that's that claim. Yeah, I think you're quite right to point that out. All right. If this is right, if this is going to be our hypothesis, sort of a starting hypothesis, then bacteria seem to do this. Bacteria are obviously aware, in some sense of the term, of their environment. They can, in some sense or another, detect differences between environmental states. And then they choose which of the environmental states is preferable. So a bacteria that eats glucose will be capable of detecting, hey, there's more glucose that way, and move that way. Now, that doesn't seem like much of a choice, right? And again, it's sort of weird. It's not even clear if we want to say that the bacteria is sort of self-aware in any meaningful sense of the term. But it's certainly aware of its environment and discriminating which environmental state is preferable to which other environmental state. And it's doing this actively in some weird sense of the term, right? Like, I mean, that's what's so weird about living things, right? When we've been talking all this time about this idea of teleonomic behaviors. These are program-directed behaviors. All right, well, if we have purposeful program-directed behaviors, a necessary facet of this is going to be discriminating what contributes to accomplishing the goal of the program and what doesn't contribute to it. And it does this sort of necessarily, you could sort of suggest, right? Yeah, and some people are actually are sending in some great examples of this, right? Flatworms sort of being able to navigate mazes if they suspect that there'll be blood at the end of the maze, right? If you cut if you cut one of the flatworms in half and both halves survive, yeah, I've read this study too. The half will know how to navigate the maze just as readily as the sort of the parent organism. It's weird to call it a parent organism. Or again, bacteria pursuing glucose in its environment, to plants rotating their leaves to get more sunlight, right? All of this behavior built into some account of perception and some account of discriminating on the basis of that perceptual information between states. Yeah, life finds a way. Right, quite literally, right, what we were saying here is that life finds a way. Yeah, Jeff Goldblum is correct. Should we call this conscious? Or let's just stick with intelligent for now. Is it this, and what do we mean by this question? Is it the same sort of thing that we're doing? Is it the same kind of thing that we humans do, right? Are we humans as special as we think we are? Because what do we think? How do we normally talk, right? We normally talk as if human beings are, in some sense, the only things in the world that display any sign of intelligence, that can choose, that are conscious. This is how we talk. This is sort of the remnant of the, even though Descartes has sort of been overturned in many respects, this is Descartes remaining with us, right? That normal stuff out there is just inert. We humans are somehow the only thing that's not. All right. So let's open this up. Let's sort of pause here. This is what I wanted us to read from the Sagan article. Right, was they get this sort of sense that Sagan and Michaelis, what they basically argue is that there's no good reason to not say that the behavior of the bacteria is in some sense choice, and so therefore in some sense intelligent, and so therefore in some sense consciousness, right? They're endorsing, they never go so far as to say it outright, but they're endorsing what eventually becomes called panpsychism, that all living things are in some sense minds. And then other people take panpsychism even farther and suggest that all things have minds to some minimal extent. So this is their hypothesis, and they're basing this on this sort of effort to try to define what they mean by an intelligent action. What is an intelligent action? And basically, they're defining an intelligent action as distinct from a mechanistic action, where there's sort of an alternative space of possible behaviors. So what's this pen going to do if I drop it? It's only going to do one thing. It's going to drop. I can do it again and again. It only has, if you want to put it this way, this pen only has one capacity. It has the capacity to drop down. But let's look at, say, a plant for a second. So this is going off of one of the questions I got in the chat, where someone wanted to push back to me about whether or not the plant is engaged in intelligent behavior when it turns to the light. So let's play with this, because this is a good one, right? Okay, plants have the capacity to orient their leaves in a variety of different directions. It's very different than this pen. This pen only has one capacity, it will drop. Right? That's all it will do. The plant, in contrast, has a wide variety of capacities in terms of what direction its leaves could be facing in. There's no one necessary direction that the leaf has to face in. The leaf could face in a variety of different directions, and on the basis of what does it do so? On the basis of its environment, right? So if the sun's over here, the leaves turn here. If I move it and now the sun's sort of over here, the leaves will turn like that. Right? So, okay, someone's pointing out this seems to be kind of mechanistic in a sense, right? Like it's just a kind of, it's sort of just like molecular breakdown. Like we could do sort of the physics kind of account of it, and it seems like, yeah, sure, but doesn't the sun have to turn that way? Or not the sun, sorry, doesn't the plant have to turn that way? Well, maybe it does. We're not talking about choice here in the sense of free will, right? Maybe the universe is entirely deterministic, so maybe you're right about that. But that's not the thing that Michaelis and Sagan want us to note. Michaelis and Sagan want us to note that the plant doesn't have to just face in one direction. It can face in a variety of different directions based on the stimuli surrounding it. Right? It's reactive to its environment, in other words. And again, we're not trying to contradict anything about modern physics here. So sure, everything can ultimately be mechanistic. That's fine, right? But notice even still how weird, if we want to use this mechanistic language, notice what a weird mechanism it is. It's very different than the kind of mechanism that we associate with things like, again, objects, right? Non-living stuff just does what it does. It moves on the basis of whatever forces sort of pushed it. But the living thing can move in a variety of different ways. This is going to be a thing that Aristotle goes back to again and again and again. Right? Living things just move in way more directions than non-living things do. And again, it's not random which direction the plant leaf is going to point in, right? It points very deliberately in the direction of the sun, right? And why do I say very deliberately? Because it's a teleonomic behavior. It's a behavior that is intended to accomplish something. We can't explain the behavior of the plant without this sort of in order to language, or the for the sake of which language. That was Mayer's claim. That's Mayer's claim for why we need this teleonomic description of living things in the first place, right? The leaves turned in order to face the sun. They didn't just turn and then they faced the sun. That would just be biologically inadequate to describe the actual mechanism that's at play. And again, I don't want to undermine what you were saying, Matthew. Like, this is indeed a mechanism still. Right? But note just the oddity of the mechanism here. It's a mechanism that is pointing towards something that is indeed deliberate. Now, again, is it deliberate on the part of the plant? That's what makes this so confusing, right? Like, it's deliberate, but is the plant choosing to do it? Well, I don't know. When are you choosing to do things? Right? I mean, like, what kind of choice do you have? Are you all demonstrating when you choose to go to Subway or stay home and be socially isolated? I mean, I could describe various sorts of mechanisms by which you all mechanistically make that choice too, right? You've got brain states, those brain states fire in particular sorts of ways, and then your limbs move in such and such a direction. So if that's the case, right? I mean, again, we're not talking about free will here. Free will is sort of completely outside this discussion. Throw free will out for the time being, right? There are mechanisms that explain why you all are able to move too, but those mechanisms are still teleonomic. So, okay, let's look at some other things. I got some other questions too. Yeah, so some people are asking, what about things like technologies now? Sure, well we can start throwing some of these in. Sure, indeed, technologies do have teleonomic behaviors. This is Mayer's whole point. Again, one of the virtues he thought of what he was proposing is that he thought teleonomic behavior wasn't something that only applied to life forms. We can describe clocks as teleonomic entities. We can describe computers as teleonomic systems, right? The difference being, and he thought in those cases that in some sense the program was external, right? So we add the program in, whereas the plant has its own program. But sure, we could say this. The vacuum cleaner is also aware of its environment. In some minimal sense. And it makes choices on the basis of that awareness. Should we indeed say that it has some low level of mind? Well, if I'm a panpsychist, why not? If I'm a panpsychist, this doesn't bother me, right? This fact is just more more important evidence, right? When does the intelligent behavior start? It's all the way down, right? The idea here is there are degrees of consciousness degrees of choice, degrees of intelligence, and these things can manifest at incredibly low levels of description. Like the bacteria or the vacuum are doing. Or it could manifest at the level of writing Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Or it can potentially, as far as they're concerned, happen at superhuman levels. Like the internet. The sort of what they meant by all this talk of sort of like a superhuman or a transhuman or a beyond human, they mean the kinds of things human beings have done, the kind of systems that human beings have created that only make sense as a kind of collective entity. Right? That what is the internet? The internet is individual humans and millions of miles of cables and silicon chips and indeed they actually allow the very possibility at the end that maybe the internet will turn into a far more crazy form of life, and we'll be like the cells of the internet, the new internet superorganism. Why not? There's no reason to think that we're the end of the intelligence system. Yeah, and you might say, you might say, like someone just said in the chat, aren't we kind of already this already? Maybe. Yeah, you might not say that, right? I mean, there's no reason to think that we're somehow the high water mark of intelligence. Maybe we too are just some possibly quite low level still level of intelligence, and that even higher levels of intelligence will be possible. We have to think really, really hard about not killing one another. Apparently, just looking at the world, we seem to do a lot of killing of one another. Maybe some transhumanist superhumans of the future, that will be an automatic behavior like breathing. Right? Maybe morality itself will become an automatic behavior of some superhuman. And we would say that they are indeed even more intelligent than us. Things that we have to consciously focus on, they can do automatically. They can master what we still must work on. I mean, and this is sort of what they sort of propose even about like bacteria just in general. That like maybe bacteria are like, what are they thinking about or what are they aware of? Maybe they're aware of like the chemical exchanges within their mitochondria. Maybe they're like really actively aware of it. Whereas all of those same interactions are happening with us, but we're so good at it, quote unquote, we don't even need to think about what our mitochondria are doing. And that's automatic for us, right? All that, the lizard brain stuff. Maybe we've just gotten so good at all the lizard brain stuff that we're not conscious of it anymore, right? But maybe the lower order creatures, maybe lizards, are indeed conscious of all of the lizard brain stuff. So kind of, I mean, they admit it's pretty speculative. And like I said, this isn't like my favored kind of philosophy. I prefer things a bit more rigorous than what they're doing in this article, but just as at least some interesting or fun speculation anyway, right? Maybe so. I mean, this is at least another way, maybe an interesting way of thinking about what we actually mean by sort of intelligence or intelligent behavior. And so then, getting back to sort of the question I sort of started with, I guess, right? Maybe the reason we are so convinced about data is that data has these highly intelligent behaviors far beyond those that we see in the bacteria. And so we're so convinced of his intelligence, even if we're not convinced of his life status. Even if we're not certain, even if there are people who are ambiguous on the subject, right? Even if by some of the accounts of life that we've seen, data wouldn't count as a life form, we still don't have any temptation whatsoever to deny him a lack of intelligence or personhood on the basis of it, because he shows those levels of intelligent behavior. So how are we doing here? How are we doing? Like I said, we're just playing with some fun ideas here today, right? So we're just playing with some ideas. We're not trying to settle anything. I'm not going to give you a definition of consciousness or a definition of self-awareness. I actually don't even think consciousness is a particularly useful concept myself. It's not my preferred way of talking about the world. I prefer the Greek way of talking about it. But regardless, we're not trying to settle anything. We're trying to sort of call into question some of these concepts that we've been using and treating as automatic, and seeing if they actually are indeed automatic. And so Caleb is following it up, just as always, as he's continually done throughout this entire semester in the chat, demanding that I then articulate, okay, so then can you be alive and not a person? Can you be alive and not intelligent? Demand, and indeed continue to demand I answer this question. Not gonna do it today though, sadly. I'll do it. I'll give you my answer on Thursday. Well, so it depends a little bit on what you think a life form is. Right? So at least based on what we've said so far, we're going to read Aristotle next time, and Aristotle is going to definitively argue that you can't be intelligent and not alive, that intelligence requires life. Aristotle is going to basically argue that. So we'll see why next time. So that's spoiler alert. That's where we're going to go. But we'll need to trace out some features of his argument first to actually sort of understand why. For today, at least, let's just, based on what we've been saying so far anyway, it depends on whether or not you think life is defined by just possessing these teleonomic properties. Indeed, but again, notice how much we're letting into the club here. Right? No one that we've looked at has given actually this definition. Maybe besides actually Margulis and Sagan. Actually, maybe they are giving this definition. I'm not sure. But we let clocks into the club. These clocks display teleonomic behavior. We let computers into the club because of life, because computers show teleonomic behavior. Okay. Is life defined by teleonomic properties acquired as a result of natural selection? This was the Badal position. Then yes, it is possible to have an intelligent thing that is not a life form. Because I could have intelligent things, right, that nevertheless weren't the results of natural selection processes. Is life defined by this sort of entropic metabolism? Right, the Schrodinger and Boden case. Then again, yes, it will in principle be possible. Right? Because I could well have something that shows signs of intelligence, maybe a computer system that shows signs of intelligence, or a computer program that shows signs of intelligence, maybe even high order levels of intelligent behavior, but still is not metabolizing. And so again, we sort of separated out the criteria a little bit in this regard. What Aristotle's actually going to probably be more leaning in this direction. Weirdly, his definition is actually going to be more in this direction. What he's going to do is actually going to be super weird. The Aristotelian stuff that we'll talk about next time is going to be a super weird orientation to the problem, and we'll read some Bedau to actually help, because Bedau actually sort of likes what Aristotle does on this question, and sort of uses it in some of his own results. But at least based on what we've said so far, anyway, the two big accounts we've been looking at, it seems like it is possible for there to be an intelligent thing that has moral status and matters and all of that, but not a life form. This seems as if it is indeed possible based on what we have said so far. All right. So how are we doing? Have we raised some interesting questions? That was really our only goal for today, is to raise some interesting questions. All right. Then go rest, go sleep, go write papers, go do whatever you need to do. Well, I'm perfectly fine with calling it there for the day. I'm going to send you out, well, at least hopefully try to send you out a few pieces of Aristotle and a little bit of more from Bedau for next time. I'm going to have to do it on my home scanner, which, yeah, we'll see how that goes. You might end up with like 7 different like PDF files, each of them 1 page long. I apologize if that ends up being the only way I can make this work. But again, there'll be one more short little daily assignment reading based on that. That'll be the last daily assignment. And again, we're just going to sort of play with stuff for these last couple of weeks. So we'll sort of play with Aristotle, play with the Bedau argument a little bit, try to see what connection might be more necessary between intelligence and life. So that'll be our goals for the remaining couple days. Hope you all are doing well. Survive for the last couple of weeks. We're near the end. We're getting close. So stay alive for the remaining little bit. And yeah, we'll talk again on Thursday. Have a good one. And let me get the recording.